So in this video, we're going to get a couple of things done. We're going to finish off our menu bar, create containers for all of the different pages in our web app, and then we're also going to load all the different tables into our MySql database. We're going to create a notification system for when you click buttons and things like that. And we're also going to install our FontAwesome library for all the icons we use. So let's get started with that. The first thing that you're going to do is you're going to notice that I updated the GitHub repository for this tutorial. So right here under this CSV folder, you're going to have all the CSV files that you need. I added descriptions for it as well. So let's go ahead and do that, add that into our app. I'm going to minimize what I have here. So I already have it on my desktop, but go ahead and download that. It's going to be in the link in the description. So I'm just going to copy and paste all of this. And then the next thing you're going to want to do is we also have a style folder that has the toaster CSS file that we're going to need to do our notification system. So if you don't want to pull it from here, what you can do is you can do toaster min CSS, just Google that. And under cdnjs.com, you should be able to find a little URL link to the min file that we're going to do. Now, toaster.min.css just means that it's compressed, so we're going to copy that URL into the browser, and this is everything we need. So you can just copy all of this, save it to a file, and then add it into our project directory. So I have mine right here on the desktop already. I'm just going to copy this and paste it into our work directory that we have, and that's going to be under the My App folder, inside of public, inside of the style folder. Okay, so now that we have that all ready to go, what you'll see is that we have this one really long line of CSS style in the toaster.css file, and the min that it had for that prefix for that file just means that it's all compressed, so it takes up less space inside of our application. It's just bundled and compressed in together, and it'll save us a little bit performance issues down the line. So with that, now we're ready to start coding. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is open up two terminals. I already have mine right here. One is running the API, and the other one is running the actual web app. So we're going to close both of these. If you don't remember how to do this, the first thing that you're going to do is cd to your project directory. So mine's React tutorial. And inside of here, you can see that we have the api.js file. You can do node api.js, and that'll run that. And then the second one is just inside of the My App folder. So if we go to the project directory, which is React tutorial, and then we go into My App, we can do npm start, and that'll start our web application. But we don't need to do that right now. First, we need to install some packages. So in order to start our in order to finish off our menu bar, we're going to need to be using a library called FontAwesome, and we're also going to use that toaster package that I just talked about. So if we look here, we have the FontAwesome directory pulled up right here for React integrations, and all we're going to do is copy these lines right here and install these packages. And then we're also going to be using this package right here, Toaster, in order to do an event system. And you can find a demo right here at the link below. So we click Show Toast, and this is what we're going to get. We're going to get some notifications for our web application. Alright, so we're going to pop on over to our terminal, and we're going to install those packages that we just talked about. So I'm just going to paste mine in here, and just make sure that you install it exactly as it's spelled here. So we're going to do FontAwesome and the SVG core. That's going to let us do our icons. And then the free solid SVG icons. We're going to do the React FontAwesome package and then the Toaster package. So click enter and let that install. Alright, so now that that's done installing, let's go on over to Visual Studio Code. And the last thing that we're going to do is we're going to add or link that style sheet into our index.html file. Alright, and as you can see right here, I've linked our style sheet for toaster.css, which resides right here in our style folder. So we're going to save that. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to create some additional folders for the different pages in our React app. So let's go ahead and do that. Under components, let's add a new folder called Anime form. This is going to be where we house all of the different files for that anime form page that we have, where you can add an anime and select a couple of different values there. So we're going to call this component animeform.js. And all we're going to do right here is create a simple component. So let's go ahead and do that. Import React. We're going to define a class called animeform, and that's going to extend our component as usual. And then we're going to define our render method so it returns something to the screen. And all we're going to do for now is animeform page. So let's copy and paste the code that we have here because we're going to reuse it. We're going to do a new folder called AnimeList. And inside of this, we're going to have a new file called animelistcontainer.js. We're going to do the same thing, except give it a different name, so animelistcontainer. And we're going to do animelistpage instead. Now let's create another folder called userlist. And this is going to be the page that shows you all the different users that are available in our application. So inside of here, we're going to create a new file called userlistcontainer.js. And inside of here, we're going to do the same thing, userlistcontainer. And then we're going to do user list so everyone has an idea when we click through those links on the menu bar of what page we're on. Okay, and now we're going to open up our app.js file, and we're going to start to use those routes, or use those components in our different routes. So let's go ahead and define those. So right at the top, we're going to start to import the files that we just created. Let's do import animeform. Let's import animelist. And let's import the user list container. Okay, so now that we have all of our imports added, let's start to create our new routes. Okay, and now you can see right here that we have added new routes. We have one for the home table container. We have one for the add anime, which is going to link to the animeform component. We have one for the list, for the anime list that we'll create in a future video, and then another path for the users list page that we'll create in another video. So now that we've done that, we don't need this test route anymore because we have multiple. So let's delete this. And let's also remove the table import statement at the top. Go over and open our menu bar. And we'll start to refactor this to use those new routes. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to import the FontAwesome library that we installed previously and some custom icons that they provide for us. And then we're also going to import the FontAwesome component from the React FontAwesome package. Okay, so now that we have that done, let's go ahead and add some links for the different menu bar buttons in our navigation bar. So we're going to delete our test component. We're going to do link to home. And this is going to have text of anime app. The next one we're going to change to list. This is going to redirect to our list component. And we're going to use that FontAwesome icon component in order to render one of the list icons that we imported from FontAwesome. We're going to copy and paste this because we're going to be reusing this code over and over again. And right here we're going to have the user route, so that's going to take us to the user route. We're going to use the FA users icon from FontAwesome. This is going to take us to the add page. We're going to use the plus icon. And then this is going to take us to the home page as well. And we're going to use that home icon that we use from FontAwesome. So let's save this, pop on back over to our terminal, and we're going to run our API. And then we're also going to start our React application with npm start. Alright, perfect. And now, as you can see right here, we have some additional items in our menu bar. If we go click the anime app, it's going to stay at the home page because that's where we told it to go. We click the plus icon, it's going to take us to the animeform page. You can see that the route has been updated as well, or the URL. We click on the user button. Oh, and it seems like nothing is being shown here, so we'll make sure that we go and change that. And then in the list button right here on the right, we can see that we're on the anime list page. So right here, this is navigating to the user route, so let's go and see what's wrong. All right. And the reason that it was wrong is because we had user here instead of users. So let's add an S to that link. And if we look at our app.js file, you can see that we defined the path URL to be /users. So let's refresh. Let's click that users button again, and you can see that now it's showing the user list page because it's redirecting to the correct URL in the browser. Alright, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to actually go on over to our index.html file and copy and paste a style sheet that is going to allow us to use FontAwesome from class names for our HTML tags. So pause the video, copy this in, and save it, and then we'll go on to the next step. The next step that we're going to do is we're going to go over to our anime table component folder, and we're going to click on this reset button and add in a FontAwesome tag here. So the FontAwesome class name we're going to do is fa-redo-alt, and then we're also going to add some style to this span. We're going to save this, pop on back over to our browser, and as you can see, we now have a little icon right here for our reset dataset button. Now the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to do some refactoring in our table container. So let's open this up, and we're going to need to add some actions here for first a delete button that we're going to have right here on the side of our table in a new column called actions. And then we're also going to link some functionality to this reset dataset button so it actually does something. So let's go over to tablecontainer.js and get to work on that. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to delete this console.log. And we're going to define a array called data, and this is going to map through all of the animes that we have. And we're going to take in each anime. So we're going to do anime. And then we're going to do anime.actions. So this is going to assign a new column called actions. And then we're going to create an image tag that is going to have a class name for the trash icon using FontAwesome. And then also delete button, which is going to be a CSS attribute or a CSS class variable that we define ourselves. We're going to give it an ID of item.animeID. Because since this is going through all of the anime objects in that array, we're going to just use that anime ID property for the object. And then on click, we're going to assign it the handle delete function, and we're going to define that together. And then the title is just going to say delete for when you hover onto it. And so now that we've assigned a new property to that object, we're going to return that object to our data array. And then right here in this data property for the table component, we're going to pass in our data variable that we just assigned together. So let's scroll on up and let's define our handle delete function. So we're going to call it handle delete. It's going to take in an event from that on click handler, and it's going to take out the ID from that event so we know what anime ID to delete from the database. And we're going to do actions.delete anime. We haven't defined this together yet, but we will in just a second. So let's save this. Let's pop on over right here, refresh our browser, and you can see that now we have a trash icon in a new column called actions. So that's perfect. So let us do the next step, which is going to be a handle reset function. So right here in the reset button, on click, we're going to do this.handle reset. And then in handle reset, it's going to be a empty function, so it takes in no arguments. It has no parameters defined. We're going to call a bunch of actions that we're going to define later down the line. So let's write these out. We're going to reset all of the different tables that are inside of our database whenever we click this button. So right here we're going to reset the anime table, we're going to reset the anime to genre table, we're going to reset the user table, the reviews table, and then also the user review table. So let's go ahead and write those actions out. Okay, perfect. So now that you have all of these written down, what this is going to do is whenever we add anime, we obviously want to reset. We want to be able to reset our database from the initial state that we had when we load up MySql. So that's why we have all these reset anime table statements so that we can get a fresh copy of our database whenever we want to. Okay, so the next thing that we need to do is we need to actually define these actions, because right now we've written them here, but our actions folder that houses all of the different defined actions that we've made ourselves, it has no idea what any of this means. So let's go on over to the actions folder and open up our index.js. And as you can see, the only action we have defined is get animes. So in order for this to work, in order for our alt Flux implementation that we've used right up here with this actions library right here, as you can see, it uses alt and then creates the actions. We need to define those actions that we're calling from that method. So let's go ahead and define those. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to import our toaster library, because we're actually going to display some notifications after these actions are called. So import toaster, and then let's go ahead and define our actions. So first is going to be delete anime. It's going to take in the ID of the anime so that our database knows which anime to delete from the table. And we're going to do toaster.success so we get that green background for the notification. We're going to do deleted anime with ID. Oh, excuse me. We need to do the $sign syntax so it takes in that variable from anime table. And then we're just going to return the ID to the dispatcher so that when our stores consume this action or are notified that an action has been dispatched, that it knows what ID to take. So that's all the only information that's going to take. Let's do reset anime table. It's going to take in a payload, and then it's going to do toaster.success. Reset anime table. And that's going to return that payload. Now all of the other ones are going to look the same, so I'm going to copy and paste this. And we're just going to simply rename them. So we're going to reset the anime genre table. We're going to reset the user table. We're going to reset the reviews table, or review table. Just add the S right here. And then we're going to reset the user review table. Okay, so now our stores are going to be able to listen, or now our dispatcher is going to have some actions to listen to, and it's going to dispatch these from the table container when we click that reset button. So let's save this. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to open up our anime store file within our stores directory so that it actually knows what to do when it gets some of these actions. Because right now we're dispatching the actions with our alt Flux implementation, but the stores aren't updating the database in any way. Our application doesn't know what to do with those actions. They're essentially just getting shot off into space, and nothing is being done in consequence when it sees those actions. So let's open our anime store. And as you can see, it's only bound to the get actions action right here. So this is the method that's called when we call get actions. So that was right here, that's what we had before. But now we need to bind all of these actions to their own event or their own function handlers whenever that action is dispatched. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to define some API endpoints. So we're going to have an API endpoint for the delete URL. We're going to have a broad reset URL. And then we're also going to have the reset anime genre URL. And these are all just API endpoints that we're going to contact from our Express API server so that it knows what to do for the certain requests that we make. And this one we can actually define to reset anime URL. So let's go ahead and do the first one. We're going to define a method for deleting anime, so handle delete anime. And that's going to only listen for actions that are called delete anime. So let's go down here, let's define that method. So whenever the delete action, or the delete anime action is called, this method is going to be invoked. So handle delete anime, and that's only going to take in the ID, or the anime ID. And it's going to do console.log handle delete anime with the anime ID. Alright, so now what we're going to do is we're actually going to make our request to the API endpoint. We haven't defined this yet, so don't worry about that. We're going to do that in the next step. But we're going to use fetch in order to make that API request, and then we're going to call this dot get animes in order to refresh our anime store with all the up-to-date animes. So let's do this. Let's use that delete URL. This is the API endpoint it's going to request with the anime ID. And then we're going to do dot then. And it's going to do this dot handle get animes. Okay, so what does this do? First, it uses the fetch API that's built into JavaScript, and it uses the delete URL. So this is the API endpoint in context, delete anime. It's going to pass in that anime ID right here that we have defined, and it's going to know, hey, I need to delete this anime with this specific ID. And then after that request finishes, after the API express API that we created is finished with that request, it's going to call this dot handle get animes to get the most up-to-date animes in the store, and then return that to our anime table container. And one thing that I did forget is we need to add slashes to the delete anime. So let's do that. Let's add a slash right here. And then we're going to do the same thing for the reset anime. And we're also going to do the same thing for the reset anime genre table. Okay, perfect. So whenever we call that reset anime table action or the reset anime genre action that we have defined right here, it's going to call the following methods: the handle reset anime method and the handle reset anime genre method. So we're going to go ahead and define those method handlers right here. So we're first going to do our console.log statement, anime store handle reset anime table with the payload. And then we're going to use fetch again. We're going to do reset URL, and then after it calls that API endpoint with the reset URL, we're going to do this dot handle get anime so that our store gets updated once again. Because we don't want any of that old data in there, it's going to reset our entire SQL database, so we need to call the get animes API endpoint one more time so we can get all that updated data. And we're going to do the exact same thing for the reset anime genre method handler. Just going to take in a payload. It's going to be anime store handle reset anime genres table with the payload. And then we're just going to fetch that reset anime genre URL. So this is going to know, hey, when I get this specific action for resetting the anime genres, the anime genre table, I'm going to call the reset anime genre URL. Oh, and it looks like I made a mistake. So instead of the reset URL for reset anime, we're going to do reset anime URL. And if you do remember, our payload for these actions are actually empty strings, so we don't even need to have this right here. We can just convert this out of a template string. Alright, perfect. So now that we have that done, what we need to do is we need to add some logic to our Express API and the API.js so that it can actually handle those specific API endpoints that we defined in the store. Because right now it's going to call these URLs, the delete URL endpoint, the reset anime, and the reset anime genre URL, and the API is not going to know what to do because the only thing we have is get all animes, which we did in the last video, I believe. Okay, so now that we're in our API file for Express, what we're going to do is we're going to define that delete anime API endpoint. So let's do get. It's going to be delete anime. And it's going to take in the ID parameter, so we're going to do a colon right there. Oh, and excuse me, let's do the single strings right here. And in that callback function, it's going to take in a request and a response, like our get all anime API endpoint. And we're going to define some SQL here. So we're going to do delete from anime, where the anime ID is equal to the ID that we send it in. And then we're going to do db.query, do query. It's going to take in a callback function, error and rows. And then on that, it's going to say if there's an error, throw the error. And then if not, send those rows and see what happens. So let's save right here. And this will be a really good place for us to bring everything together and test out our application. So let's see, I have an error right here in Anime Store. Let's look at what that's about. Oh, and it seems like I accidentally imported something on line 3, so let's delete that. Save. Looks like we're good to go. And let's restart our API server, or else it's not going to take in any of those changes. So do node api.js. Let's go over here. Let's refresh. And if we click this, you're going to see that we got some notifications now. Perfect. Now, this obviously doesn't do anything yet because we haven't deleted anything. So let's click delete. And it didn't do anything. So let's check and see what's going wrong. Okay, and the reason that our delete function didn't do anything is because I accidentally messed this up. So let's do const query, save our API one more time, and let's restart it one more time. So let's refresh the page. Click delete, and perfect. As you can see, we're updating in real time. It's also deleting the animes that we want it to. And we're getting our notifications as well. So let's click reset database. And as you can see, the actions are being dispatched, but our anime table isn't getting updated at all. So let's click this. And if we look in the console, we can see that it responded with a status of 404. It wasn't found. And the reason that is because we don't have a API endpoint for our Express API defined yet for the reset button. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create an API endpoint for resetting the anime table. So let's define that right here. It's going to be /resetAnime. And just like above, it's going to take in a request and a response and the callback parameters. And we're going to have a couple of queries here. So the first one is going to be to drop the table if it exists. So we're saying, hey, if that table exists, we want you to just get rid of it, so that we can repopulate it ourselves. The next we're going to do is a create table statement, and so we're going to recreate the table with all of the columns that we need it to have from scratch, and there's not going to be any data in it. It's going to be completely empty, so let's define all the columns. Okay, so now we have our create table statement right here. I simply just redefined all of the columns, so go ahead and type that out. And then the next statement is we're actually going to load in the data from our file. So we're going to do load data in file, and we're going to do CSV /anime table /CSV into the table anime, where the fields are terminated by those commas because it's a CSV file. We're going to ignore one line. And then we're going to tell it the order in which to put in the data into that anime table. Okay, perfect. So if you look right here, it's saying, hey, look at the CSV /anime table CSV path. So if we go up here, we can see that we have, a CSV folder, and we have the anime table right here. So that's all we did. And then we told it the order in which all of the columns should have data inserted into them. And then we're going to do what we did above. So we're going to do db.query, take in the query and the rows, the error in the rows on the callback. If there's an error, throw the error. And if not, let's send those rows. Oh my goodness, I did it again. Okay, so we need to copy and paste the query. We need to define an extra attribute in our connection. So what we need to do is do multiple statements and set that equal to true, because what we're doing right here is we're running 3 queries at once and nothing is happening. So while we're here, we might as well just do the third API, or the next API endpoint that we had defined, which is going to be the reset anime genre table. So let's go ahead and do that. And this is going to be more or less the same thing, just with the different table. I'm going to do anime genre. And then we're going to redo all of the create table statement and load table statements. So I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this in here. All right, perfect. And now that I have that copy and pasted in there, we're just going to rerun that query one more time. All right, perfect. So let's save this. All right, and we made one more typo. So if we do drop table, we need to add if exists. And let's rerun this for the 4th time. So let's do this. Let's delete some anime. And let's reset our database. And we can see that everything is going according to plan. It reset everything once again. And we have no errors in the console. Perfect, just what we wanted. So the next thing that we're going to need to do is we're going to actually need to go over what we just did. So right here, initially there's nothing in our anime genre table before you click that reset button. What I did was, instead of having to create a separate script to load all the data into the database, I combined it into these 2 reset API endpoints. Okay, so if we go ahead and open up our MySql workbench, we're going to open up our tutorial connection. Going to open up our tutorial database. And we're going to look at our anime table. Everything is there just like we wanted it. And then we're going to look at our anime genre table. And you can see that we have some mappings here to the genre ID that we have not gone over and created yet. This is something that I created off of a script. So basically the way it works is we're going to create the genre table, and all of the different genres that we have, so action, adventure, romance, comedy, things like that, are going to be mapped to a number. And then those numbers are going to be mapped to a anime and its ID, so we can get all of the genres for that specific anime, because they might have multiple mappings, they might not. And so that's something we're going to do in just a second. But basically what we did was, in our API, we said, if the table doesn't exist, this anime genre table. So when we first clicked, or before we clicked that reset button for the first time and had that functionality there was nothing in this anime genre table, and it wasn't even created. There was nothing there, so it dropped it. But there's nothing to drop, so they don't have to do anything. Easy operation. The next thing that it did was it created the anime genre table, and so that's why you see that here, right here, in our MySql database right now. That's why we have the anime genre table, because of this line of code that creates it. And then the next thing that we did was we loaded the data that was inside of this anime genre CSV table file. So I'll open this up to show you. So it loaded all of this data in there right after we clicked that reset button. And that's why you see all of this data right here into the table. So I hope that makes sense. I hope it's a little more clear. I know it looks kind of like magic right now, but it should all come together by the end of the tutorial. Okay, and the last thing that we're going to do, just as a bit of cleanup in this API file, is we're actually going to create our own function. So I'm going to go up here to execute these queries, because right now I'm tired of doing db.query. And so we're going to create our own function. It's going to take in a query and a result string. Or not a result string, it's going to take in the response. So db.query, it's going to take in that query. On the callback, it's going to do exactly what we've been doing before. Throw the error or send the rows. So if there's an error, throw that error. And if there's not, send those rows. So let's close that. And that should be good to go. So now all we need to do is refactor this to do execute query SQL res. And I'm going to rename all of these variables to SQL before I get into some trouble and keep throwing those errors. And so let's copy this. We're going to just take out all of these db.queries just so we have some more simplified code. It looks a little better. Alright, perfect. So let's restart our API one more time just to make sure everything's working. Let's delete some anime. And then let's also reset the table. Perfect. And it looks like everything's going according to plan. So now we'll move on to the next step. All right, and actually one thing that we're going to do now, since we're already in this file, we're going to define the API endpoints for all of the other reset table functions that we need to handle. So let's do one for the reset users. Let's also do one for the reset reviews. Sorry, there's a little typo right here. Let's get rid of that slash. And then let's also do one for the reset user reviews. Okay, so now this is going to function exactly like the other ones up here. So I'm going to copy and paste the code that I have, and then you guys can just pause the video and copy it. Okay, perfect. So now you can see I copy and pasted the code that we have for these 3 additional methods. So what this is going to do, just as a quick overview, is this is going to be set to the reset users API endpoint. And it's going to drop the table users if it exists. It's going to create the table users with all of these specified columns, so user ID, first name, last name, yada, yada, yada. And then it's going to load in the data file for the users table, which we have in our CSV directory. It's right up here, so you can open that up if you want. You can see all the data that's inside of it right here. And then it's going to do the same exact thing for the reviews table and the mapping table for users to reviews. So as you can see, drop the reviews table if it doesn't exist, create the reviews table, and then load some data into it. Same thing for the user reviews, drop the table user review if it exists. If it doesn't, then nothing to do there. Create the table user review, and then load the data into the user review table. All right, perfect. So now that we have all of those API endpoints set up, none of these are going to do anything right now. We don't have them being called anywhere. So don't worry about that. If these tables aren't being created in your database, that's because we haven't set it up yet. But just as a quick overview, let's go over what we did. So the first thing that we did was we added an actions column to our table right here. We added some icons to our reset button and then also our delete button. We also mapped some actions right here. Now these ones aren't being right here, these bottom 3 aren't being mapped to any event handlers right now or method handlers in stores. So that's why we don't see anything going on here. But for the top 2, we mapped the reset anime table action and reset genre table action, as well as the delete anime and yeah, just those 3 to some actions that we have right here. So these actions are all defined. You can see the similarities, and these 3 right here are specifically mapped to something in the store. So we have delete anime, the reset anime table, and reset anime genre table. So if we go to the anime store class, we can see that we added these additional mappings. So for when you see the delete anime action, let's call it handle delete anime, in addition to the reset anime table and the reset anime genre table to their corresponding method handlers. And after you do that, you get the action, you're going to invoke this specific method. We console.log, and then we also we send a request to those specific API endpoints. So we're going to use the delete URL for delete anime, and we have that defined here. You can see that this is mapped to the exact same thing in our API, so /delete anime. And if you look at the ports that we have set up, this is 4000. It maps specifically right here. It all runs on localhost, so that's why we have localhost. And this is the API endpoint for deleting anime. So you delete the anime based on whatever the ID is, and we send in the ID right here. So we have the delete URL, and we send in the ID there. And then you just perform a query on the database to say, hey, where this anime ID equals the requests ID that was set in the parameters object, Let's execute that query and then update the database accordingly. After that is all called in this promise, on the callback we request that we get handling the new anime so that we can set that to the state of the table container. And all of this will flow back down into our table component right here. So we get some updated state right here from the handle get animes. And then we retrieve that updated state right here on the onChange method in our table container with React. So I hope that makes a little more sense. The last thing I think we should do is probably update our style sheet so you have the nice delete button with some updated colors. So that's going to be the last thing we do. Let's go to our stylesheet.css and add in a class as well as a new color that we're going to be using. So the new color I'm going to add is primary dark red. I'm just going to copy and paste that in there. So just add this line for our custom CSS variables that we use in file. And then I'm going to scroll down and define that delete button class so that we get some nice CSS there. So let's do color variable and use that primary red CSS attribute that we have defined. And let's just do delete button on hover. We're going to set that color to a variable primary dark red, which we just defined upstairs right here at the top of the file. So let's save this. Let's refresh and look down, and now you can see that we have a nice little red color. When you hover over it, it becomes darker so that you have some indication that this is clickable. We'll do one final walkthrough just to make sure that everything's going according to plan. Nothing wrong right here. Let's open up our console, so right click and click inspect. And we can see that we have some table statements. So we got the animes on the initial render, we called the delete button, and then we got our updated animes. We deleted blah blah blah. You go down, we handled our reset database, and at the end we needed to get all of the new anime rows from our anime table in the database, so we called get animes one more time to update our store with the most up-to-date data in our database. So that's going to wrap it up for this video. I know it was really long, all over the place, but stick in there. We're almost done, and the next project that we're going to do is going to be really cool. So I hope you guys stay around for that. In the next one, we're going to create our anime form page right here, and I think you guys will really like that. It's got some animated style to it with some just some animated components to it for the input tags and stuff like that. So I'll see you guys in the next video.